Welcome to the Pragati Vichar Literature Festival 2023 organized by Frontlist Media. This year's theme is Taking Humanity Forward. Today, we all are present here to celebrate the affection for literature and discuss the pivotal subject matters prevailing in the society and establish engaging conversations with the audience. And the session would be historical fiction, and the topic of today's session is Extraordinary Story of Unsung Heroes. And we will be talking to Vijay Balan, sir. He grew up in Ooty, India, and has lived and worked in many parts of the world. An avid history buff, he enjoys weaving insights and nuances from his wide travels and readings into storytelling. His debut novel, The Swaraj Spy, is based on the experiences of his granduncle as a member of the Indian National Army espionage wing in World War II. Hi, sir.
Hi, glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Sir, it is such a pleasure to have you on board with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, I would like to start this question and answer round with the most asked questions, and it is, what was your idea behind naming this book, The Swaraj Spy?
That's a great place to start, the title of the book. The word Swaraj, as many of you know, means self-rule. And that word was a slogan during the freedom movement. And in fact, the great Lokmanya Tilak famously said, "Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it." So the story arc of my book has India's freedom struggle as a backdrop. Also, the secret spy school where the protagonist of the book, my granduncle, was trained by Japanese intelligence and the Indian National Army, was called the Indian Swaraj Institute. And this spy school was set up by the Japanese and the INA to defeat the British in World War II, take them out of the war, and thereby gain independence for India. But perhaps most importantly, my book is a book of human transformation, in that I get into how the savagery of war and the double dealing and double crossing of espionage affects a person. So the book is also about how my granduncle found his own Swaraj, or his own self-rule, of a very different kind. Mute.
Thank you so much, sir. So, this book is a perfect blend of historical fiction and war discrepancies. Please walk us through the writing process of the book.
Thank you. The seed for this book was planted in my mind by my late father, who told me stories about my granduncle, and they were extraordinary stories. And I kept those stories. Those stories stayed with me in my mind, as I grew up. About 13 years ago, I had an epiphany. I said, wow, this is a story that must be told. But as I began, I found that 80-year-old trail had gotten cold. It was frozen. There was nothing there. So it was like assembling an old beaten up jigsaw puzzle with many pieces missing. So I started digging. I traveled many times to different parts of the world. I live in the United States. And to meet people. And I met one person who introduced me to another person. It was kind of like a daisy chain. And I also traveled to get kind of a visual reference of the places that I was writing about, because I tend to be a pretty visual writer, and to also study documents and so on. And slowly, and the process was very gradual, the story kind of emerged out of the mist, so to speak. And the real story was actually way more amazing, and the twists and turns were more exciting than the little nuggets that my dad had left with me. So I also made a decision to kind of stay pretty close to the research facts and really use my narration as a vehicle to put forward those facts. I also faced another interesting challenge, because while I was writing this book, I was running a fintech consulting company. And so business strategy and creative writing They exercise two very different parts of the brain. So I wrote this book in spurts between delivering client engagements. And when you switch like that, there each time there's a ramp time to get into the zone. So as a writer, it's important to allow yourself time to get into that sweet spot. And if you're a writer, you'll know what I mean. That's when your words start flowing a lot more easily, and you start seeing things in your mind's eye with a greater degree of clarity. But in some ways, the heaviest lifting came after I wrote my first manuscript. I decided to use the time that I had while I was knocking on doors trying to get published to revisit my writing. And I found that detachment gave me a fresh perspective. But I also chose to take input from people whose opinions I respected, including, by the way, one person who told me to cut out 30% of the book. Ouch. So, but when you do that, it is important to keep your ego out of the picture, and that is oh so difficult because as a writer, you're invested in every word, every paragraph, every sign, every scene, but it's very difficult to do surgery on yourself. But it's important to do that dispassionately, and so I kept tweaking the book. But having said that, there's a quote that is incorrectly attributed to Da Vinci, but it was actually said by the French writer Paul Valéry, who said that a work is never finished, but merely abandoned. So at some point, you're going to have to stop tweaking it, and you have to kind of abandon your book and let it go and let other people savor it. So that was kind of roughly the process that I followed.
Thank you so much, sir. And as you've told us that you met a lot of people along the way to meet people and to explore more what of their story. So can you just let us know one of the crazy or the hilarious stories or the stories that have touched some of your story style writing style?
Well, I tell you, I mean, my style tends to be an evocative style, and I will get into it as we go forward, because what I try to do is to take my readers with me to these places and times so that they get a real reference. But I'll tell you what I found interesting is as I was researching this book, the extent to which people were willing to help. And I'll give you a small example without giving away the story. There is a certain place in Madras now called Chennai, where through a house on the street, my granduncle had letters smuggled back to his brother, and I had the address of this house. So my cousin and I, we arrived there one day on a motorbike, and we knocked on the very first door that we arrived at. And we were two strangers, by the way, just showing up from nowhere. And I spoke to the lady, and I can speak Tamil, and I told her that this is why we are here. My granduncle, was a patriot, and we're trying to find out this house. And this lady, this was in the morning. She still had turmeric on her face, and she was getting ready to do her work at home. And it was amazing. She said, "Oh, I definitely have to help you." And she spent 3 hours with us, going from house to house to house, telling the people, this is why these people are here. They're trying to trace this family. They're trying to trace this house. And those people in the homes that we visited, they welcomed us in. They had us have coffee. So the people of India, I tell you, I was so touched because they still remember the freedom struggle so many generations later. And this lady was so kind to two absolute strangers to spend a good part of her morning away from the tasks that she was supposed to do at home. So those were some of the things that I found extraordinary. You're on mute.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this book profoundly depicts India's struggle for freedom, as you were speaking right now. Also, what message do you think the young generation might be able to draw from it?
That's a great question. India, in particular, a very large percentage of India's population is under the age of 30. So freedom is something that most people take for granted, and it is completely understandable because the freedom struggle and the Quit India movement, the INA and the World War II and all of that was a long time ago. And it's the kind of stuff that people read in textbooks. And so it's not real. But that freedom was won through a great effort on the part of many people and significant sacrifice. So, and the freedom came at a price, but that is so very difficult for people to relate to uh, because it's not just in India, the world over. History is talked about in kind of an abstract fashion. So it's not real, it's something far away. So that's why I chose two vehicles in my writing. One was an evocative style through which I take the reader to the different places in time and get my readers to experience what my characters experience. And the second is a focus on the effect of history on people, not the events themselves, but how those events affected the lives of ordinary people, both that people that were on the spot as well as their loved ones elsewhere. So that way, I have strived to make history real without being overt about it. So I think young people reading the book will not only enjoy being transported to a different time and place, but will also understand that freedom came at a price. And I think they will get the opportunity to compare their lives today and the challenges that they face today with those of their grandparents and the challenges they faced during colonial rule. Because, at the end of the day, two generations is too soon to take all those wonderful collective memories and put them in a vault somewhere and lock it and throw away the key.
Thank you so much, sir. And I just would like to add one question, one cross question. It's that what made you write a story about India's struggle for liberation and add a new perception of to it through the lens of a patriotic spy?
Uh, I love uncovering and sharing little known history, and the Swaraj Spy is one such story. For example, while most people know about Mahatma Gandhi ji and the non-violent struggle for freedom, and many people know about Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, uh, if I were to ask you to name the first leader of the Indian National Army or the INA, you and I'm sure most people will say, of course, it's Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, and that would be incorrect because the first leader of the INA was a man called Captain Mohan Singh. So, and this is the part of unknown history that I'm talking about. There was an INA before the one that most people know about. And that army, that INA collapsed because of tension between the Japanese and the Indians, because the Indians wanted an explicit commitment to freedom, and that was not easily forthcoming. So my book poses some larger questions as well, subtly between the lines, as to who were the good guys and who were the bad guys in all of this. Was it the British? Was it the Japanese? Was it the Indians? The answer is not always clear. And I also like your use of the word lens, because from the vantage point of the protagonist in the story, he sees many things. And my readers see these things through his lens. The overbearing British, the brutality of Japanese occupation, the double game and double crossing in espionage, and the tension between the Japanese and the Indians, and also the dark side of colonial administration and colonial justice. So my readers, I think, will get an opportunity to look at today's times and compare them with what had happened 80 years ago and many of those events that are still shaping our reality. Because I think it was Mark Twain who said that history doesn't always repeat itself, but it often rhymes. So there's an opportunity to do some reflection after reading my book.
So I'm pretty sure that your book knows that it is like showing something else, some ideas or something to show to the world that this has happened, and this is the moral of the story that you need to incorporate. But I'm sure that your book must be having some hidden meanings and some hidden the things to learn, the way.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of unknown things that people don't generally know that I reveal in the book. So it's an opportunity to learn, but as also as to an opportunity to reflect both on the larger issues at hand, but also on people's individual lives and their individual situations.
Okay. So, sir, while actively participating in India's struggle for freedom, the story's protagonist is also on a mission to rescue his fellow agents. So, how did you connect these two parallel trails into the story that follows?
Well, I often tell people that the Swaraj Spy is about three intersecting journeys. The first one is the physical journey of the main character in a large counterclockwise circle from the paddy fields of Malabar through Madras, colonial Singapore, to kind of steamy, kind of lazy Penang, through the pagodas of Burma and the jungles and back to India. And the second is the personal transformative journey of this man from being a gung-ho, take that hill kind of paramilitary officer to what I would call kind of a reflective soul. And the third journey is the backdrop, which is India's own tumultuous march to freedom, the non-cooperation movement, the INA, the Quit India movement, and so on. So my book is a layered book, and the reader is free to relate to the different attributes of the book, like, for example, intrigue and adventure in an evocative landscape, or the questions of karma and the human condition, or the larger geopolitical shifts. They can relate to any one of these attributes in a way that they feel comfortable. I don't make any prescriptions in terms of how the reader should read the book. The choices are all there. But it is a layered book, and I think as readers keep digging into the book, they will discover new and different facets that will jump out at them.
Thank you so much, sir. So, your book is based on the life of your granduncle. To what degree did you incorporate fiction in the story?
Okay, to me, fiction is the vehicle that carries the facts. So, for example, if I had created a narrative where the Japanese won the war, that would be historical fantasy fiction. That is, by the way, nothing wrong with that. That is a genre, a respected genre in its own right. But that's not what I chose to do. So in the Swaraj Spy, the story is factual for the most part. Where the fiction comes in is where I get my readers to see, smell, and hear and experience what my characters are going through. And since this book is aimed at anyone that likes reading and not necessarily a scholar in history or political science, I see it as my duty to take the reader to a particular place and see in all dimensions of that word through using the word that you used a while ago, the lens of my characters, what my characters are seeing. And I want those scenes to linger in their minds long after the last page is turned. So while I said my focus is on the way history affects people, I also want them to learn this little known history without taxing themselves. In fact, It's interesting. A reader recently told me that it is only after he finished the book he had discovered that he had actually learned a lot of history without realizing that that was what was going on. And that was exactly my objective. I don't want to be heavy about the history. It's there, it's threaded in, but the main objective is to have the person, have the reader enjoy a narrative and go to a different place in time.
Incredible, sir. Good objective because it will affect two things. First one is he will be knowing all the all the facts about the history, which is sometimes unknown, and secondly, he will enjoy it as well. So I feel like in my school days as well, I used to hate history. I just feel I always felt like the books of history they use such words and they just make it so boring that and if anybody will have an interest in history, he will lose it. So I feel like the objective is so different from what I've heard and what I've read up till now.
I'll
And
tell you, if I can interrupt, I mean, you're talking about your school days reminded me. In my school days, and as you said, I grew up in Uti, and I had a teacher who kind of planted this history seed in me. And he was a Canadian man, but he had lived in India for many, many decades, and he loved India. And he had a wonderful way of teaching history. So he was this big roly-poly man with a red beard, and he would wear a cape. And he was teaching us about Shivaji and Aurangzeb. And he would actually act it out. And he would walk to one side of the room, and he would say Shivaji was like a bee. He would come and sting him, and then Aurangzeb would look around, and then Shivaji would go to the other place, to the other side, and sting him from the other side. And we were kids. We loved that. We laughed and we enjoyed his class. And the other thing that he would do is, back then comic books were very popular. He made us draw four compartment comics about different things in history. So he made it so real, and that was wonderful. So that storytelling that he did back so many years ago stayed with me, and that's what I've tried to bring into my work.
thank you so much, sir. And what tips would you like to give to aspiring historical fiction writers, sir?
Well, the first thing that I would suggest to writers is to be very clear about the kind of reader that you have as an audience for your work. And a lot flows from that. Because, for example, I chose to write for a reader who loves language and who loves reading, but is not necessarily a history scholar or even a history buff. Now, that makes the balance tricky, and that is how to inform the reader without coming across as professorial and keeping them engaged. So that's where the trick of using your narration cleverly as a vehicle that takes forward the research facts comes in. And as you said, I believe school systems, not just in India, but the world over, have done a great disservice by making history dry, unappealing, and in your words, boring, because most people, the moment you say history, they say, whoa, no, that's boring stuff. And it's this, in 1526, Babur and Ibrahim Lodi fought the first battle of Panipat, that kind of thing. It's not exciting. But history is, after all, his story and her story. So keep that in mind. And also, if you're writing about unknown history, put in the time and effort to do the digging. It might take time, but you will enjoy the journey. And once you unearth the facts will tell their own story. And your job then is to really be the vessel that shapes the water that's inside it, right? And take the reader with you to places and times in your story. So here's what I do. I close my eyes and I picture what my character is seeing and what they're hearing and what's smelling. So smell is a very strong emotion which takes you to different places, and sometimes even what they're tasting. So I imagine all of this, and then I find the words to put on paper or type on a keyboard. But do this without pages and pages of description, because that will lose the reader. And that's where your ability to move readers through good evocative language comes in. So storytelling is an art, and you just have to keep honing it over the years. It's like a muscle. You've got to keep training it to keep it in shape, and you've got to keep sharpening it like you sharpen a pencil. But as I also said earlier, I like to focus on how history affects people, and how different individuals react to varied situations in different ways. And so it also helps to be a keen observer of people and places and sounds. And in my case, I have had the privilege of having traveled a lot. So I actually have in my mind, in my brain, kind of a video library, if you will, of places I've been to, sounds that I've heard, smells that I've experienced, and people whom I have met. And a lot of times, all of this comes out as composites when I start writing. So that helps. If you kind of develop the habit of always being aware of what's around you and locking it away, you'll find that when you write, a lot of that will come out on its own. So those are some just kind of broad vehicles. Know your audience, do the research, and remember that his story is actually a story, and try to take your reader to the place and time that you want to talk about, and then keep this video library of experiences in your own mind over the years, and that'll help you.
Thank you so much. So, with the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, do you think humanity will ever be able to live in peace and harmony without the fear of another war, breaking out?
Sadly, I'm sorry to say no, because the story of conflict is as old as the story of the humanity itself. So while the weapons have changed, the systems have changed, and the tactics have changed, the driving forces of conflict, greed, insecurity, ideology, religion, and just plain old hubris, that hasn't changed one bit over the centuries. The one hope is that, the weapons of mass destructions, nuclear weapons, and so on, may make the kind of world war that I write about unthinkable. But keep in mind that we've seen so many proxy wars, insurgencies, and even conventional conflict between countries that have nuclear weapons. We've seen that happen many times since World War II. So wars are so very easy to start, but they're notoriously unpredictable, as we have seen from the Ukraine-Russia conflict that you just talked about. But one thing is common, and that is these wars have devastating effects on the lives of people. And that's why I have chosen to take that aspect as the vehicle that takes my story forward. Because, I don't think conflict is ever going to go away. But I think if we are aware of how it affects us, how it affects people, how it affects the other person, I think perhaps there will be at least some opportunity to look at conflict in a different way.
It's all about the perception, sir.
Well, let me put it this way. I mean, the conflict is going to be there whether we like it or not. I don't think that's going to go away. So the only real option that we have, I mean, there have been great efforts in history, the League of Nations and the United Nations and so on, to try and somehow stop these horrible conflicts from happening. But those efforts haven't succeeded because I think, as I said, those basic drivers for conflict haven't gone away, the greed and the insecurity and ideology and all of that. So that's not going to go away. So, but the only thing that we can do is to try and be sensitive to what this is going to do to people, not just yourself, but also your enemy, because those missiles, when they go hit somebody, someone else's country, those people and those women and those children and those those adults are going to suffer as well. So we can keep that in mind and perhaps, celebrate our common humanity as opposed to, trying to bomb someone out of existence. But the basic answer to your question is, unfortunately, I wish I could give you another answer. I don't think conflict is going away. I think we're stuck with it.
Thank you so much, sir. And with that, the question and answer round is over. But I would like to ask one last question, and it would be personal. I just want to ask what genre you like to read and would like to try next, other than
Well,
fiction.
well, in terms of writing, I'm going to stay pretty much in this genre because I enjoy it,
Uh,
and it is this kind of subgenre, in that it's little known history. What I
yeah.
want to write about is things that a lot of people don't know about. Um, digging, the uncovering, and sharing. As I told you, sharing facts with people about the unknown INA before the INA, and the fact that there was a spy school. I mean, these are things that are not known. I enjoy
Mhm.
doing that. So I think that's what I'm going to stay with. And it's interesting, even doing the research for this book, it was like a spider web. As I found something, five other things popped up. And so there's a whole uh, treasure trove of material that I've dug out that I haven't used in this book, which may give me inspiration for future work. So that's where I see myself staying. And in terms of my own reading, I read all kinds of things. I know, both in terms of nonfiction. I read a lot of nonfiction, actually, to kind of inform myself and develop that bedrock of knowledge upon which I build my stories. Uh, Even before I started writing this book, I had read a lot of military history, and I knew a lot about World War II. So I was able to build on that knowledge and then bring my narrative skills into play to make it more approachable for readers.
Thank you so much, sir. I hope you enjoyed this session as much as our audience did. It was such an interesting and enlightening session. Thank you for coming on board.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to have spent this time with you. Great questions. You brought out many aspects of my work, and thank you.